The first sign that Ariana Vanderbilt's perfect annual garden party was about to be spectacularly ruined wasn't the cruel, muffled laughter aimed at her pregnant daughter-in-law, Claire. It wasn't even the single silent tear that traced a path down Claire's cheek as she stood isolated by the rose bushes. The first sign was a sound, a faint rhythmic chopping in the distance, a sound so out of place in the serene quiet of the exclusive Greenwich estate that it was first dismissed as a lawn-mower. But it grew louder, angrier. A pulsating whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that shook the very champagne flutes in the hands of the people who had just finished tearing a young woman's spirit to shreds. They had no idea they weren't just mocking a quiet artist. They were angering a king, and his arrival was imminent. Claire traced the rim of her water glass, the crystal cool against her fingertips. Across the small bistro table, her husband, Liam Vanderbilt, was radiating the kind of effortless charm that had first drawn her to him. His smile was genuine. His eyes, the color of warm whiskey, held an earnestness that seemed entirely out of place in the world he came from. He was talking about his latest architectural project, a sustainable community center, his hands sketching invisible blueprints in the air with infectious passion. This was the man she loved. Liam, the man who saw her a quiet, modestly successful painter, who preferred charcoal sketches to diamond bracelets and didn't try to change her. He loved her worn-out sweaters, her paint-stained fingers, and the way she'd get lost in thought, staring at the patterns of light on a wall. Their life together in their cozy city apartment was their sanctuary. It was simple, real, and filled with a love so profound, it felt like the only truth in the world. The baby, a tiny life growing within her, was the beautiful, miraculous culmination of that love. She was 6 months along, and the gentle flutters in her belly were a constant, reassuring reminder of their shared future. But their sanctuary had walls, and beyond those walls was Liam's family, the Vanderbilts. The name itself felt heavy like a block of polished marble. They weren't just wealthy. They were an institution. New money, perhaps, by the standards of old European dynasties, but 2 generations of ruthless real estate development had cemented their name on the highest echelons of New York and Connecticut society. They lived in a world of galas, boardrooms, and brutal social calculus where net worth was synonymous with self-worth. "You're quiet tonight," Liam said, his voice pulling her from her thoughts. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Worried about Saturday?" Claire gave a weak smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to me," he said gently. "It's just a garden party, darling. My mother's annual excuse to show off her peonies and intimidate the governor. It's not just a party, Liam. It's a performance. And I don't know my lines." This would be the 3rd Vanderbilt family event she'd attended since their whirlwind wedding 6 months ago. The first 2 had been excruciating. She had been treated not as a person, but as a puzzle to be solved, a curiosity. Where did Liam find her? Her background was a source of constant, thinly veiled interrogation. She had grown up in rural Oregon, homeschooled for much of her life. Her parents, she'd explained vaguely, were in logistics and valued their privacy. It was a half-truth, but it was all she could offer. The truth was a secret she guarded with a fierce, almost desperate protectiveness, a secret she hadn't even shared with Liam. It wasn't because she didn't trust him. She trusted him with her life, with the life of their child. But she had seen what colossal wealth did to people. She had grown up in its shadow, watching it warp relationships, breed suspicion, and turn love into a transaction. Her father, a man whose name was whispered with a kind of awe in circles the Vanderbilts could only dream of entering, had raised her to value anonymity above all else. "Let them love you for the contents of your soul, not the contents of my vault," he had told her time and time again. And so she had built a life for herself on her own terms. She sold her art under her mother's maiden name, lived simply, and when she met Liam at a small gallery opening, she had felt for the first time seen for exactly who she was. Telling him the truth felt like a betrayal of that pure connection, like introducing a poison into their perfect world. She was terrified that the number attached to her family name would change the look in his eyes, forever placing a golden barrier between them. "You don't need lines." Liam squeezed her hand. "Just be you. That's all I want. And if my mother says one word out of line, I'll handle it." She knew he would try, but Liam, for all his goodness, was blind to the nuances of his mother's cruelty. Ariana Vanderbilt was a master of the backhanded compliment, the condescending smile, the dismissal disguised as concern. She wielded social niceties like surgical instruments, each one designed for a precise, painful cut. Ariana had made it clear from day one that she believed Claire was an opportunistic schemer who had trapped her brilliant son. The pregnancy in Ariana's eyes was not a blessing, but the final cynical move in Claire's checkmate. The official invitation had arrived a week prior, thick cream cardstock with embossed lettering. "Mrs. Ariana Vanderbilt requests the pleasure of your company." It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. "She asked me what I was planning to wear." Claire confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "She suggested I let her stylist assist me so I don't feel out of place." Liam's jaw tightened. "She did not. I'll call her." "No, please," Claire said quickly. "It'll just make it worse. It'll prove her point that I'm a fragile little mouse who can't handle things. I'll be fine. I bought a new dress. It's simple, but I think it's elegant." He sighed, the anger in his eyes softening into concern. "You are the most elegant woman I've ever known, Claire. In a $500 dress or a $5 one. Don't you ever forget that." She wanted to believe him. As she got ready on the morning of the party, she tried to hold on to his words. The dress was a simple, pale blue maternity maxi dress. It was tasteful and comfortable. She braided her long brown hair, opting for a simple, natural look. She wore no jewelry, save for her wedding band and a small, worn silver locket her father had given her when she was a child. As she looked at her reflection, she saw a woman who looked gentle, perhaps a little tired, and very, very pregnant. She didn't see a threat, but she knew Ariana Vanderbilt would. To Ariana, her simplicity wasn't a virtue. It was a glaring admission of her inferior breeding. It was the uniform of an imposter. "Ready to go?" Liam asked, coming up behind her. He looked impossibly handsome in a crisp linen shirt and tailored trousers. He wrapped his arms around her, resting his hands on her belly. "My two beautiful girls," he murmured into her hair. The baby kicked in response. For a moment, in the safety of his embrace, she felt a surge of strength. He was her shield. They were a team. They could face anything together. But as they drove out of the city and into the lush, manicured landscapes of Greenwich, Connecticut, a knot of dread tightened in her stomach. The gates to the Vanderbilt estate loomed ahead, massive wrought-iron monstrosities that seemed designed to keep the unworthy out. And Claire knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she was about to enter the lion's den. The Vanderbilt estate wasn't just a house, it was a declaration. A sprawling neo-classical mansion of blinding white stone, it sat perched on a hill overlooking acres of lawn, so unnaturally green and perfectly striped it looked like a computer rendering. Fountains burbled, imported statues posed artfully in sculpted gardens, and a fleet of luxury cars, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, a few token Teslas for show, were already parked by valets in crisp white uniforms. As Liam navigated their modest sedan up the winding gravel driveway, Claire felt herself shrinking. Her world of quiet studios and cozy cafes felt a universe away. This was a world built on display, on power, on the silent, ruthless judgment of appearances. Liam, sensing her unease, gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Deep breaths. We find my mother, say hello, get some of those little crab cakes you like, and we can be out of here in 2 hours, I promise." 2 hours felt like a lifetime. The moment they stepped out of the car, the performance began. A chorus of "Liam, darling!" erupted from a group of women near the entrance. They descended upon him with air kisses and flashing jewelry, their eyes flicking over Claire with forensic curiosity. Liam handled it with practiced ease, introducing Claire with a proud arm around her shoulders. "Everyone, this is my wife, Claire." The smiles they offered her were tight, fleeting things that didn't reach their eyes. They noted her visible baby bump, and their expressions shifted from curiosity to a kind of knowing pity, as if confirming a shared suspicion. Ariana Vanderbilt stood near the grand stone steps leading to the veranda, holding court like a queen. She was a tall, impeccably preserved woman in her late 50s, dressed in a sharp, cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than Claire's car. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a flawless helmet, and her smile was a weapon. "Liam, you're late," she said, her voice carrying a note of theatrical disappointment. Her eyes swept over Claire from her simple braid down to her sensible flat sandals, and her lips thinned almost imperceptibly. "And Claire, how quaint you look." "Hello, Mother," Liam said, his tone firm. "Claire looks beautiful." "Of course, dear. The natural look is so brave," Ariana replied, turning her attention back to her guests. The dismissal was absolute. Claire was a footnote, an accessory she didn't approve of. They moved through the party, a sea of pastel linen, glittering diamonds, and forced laughter. Liam was constantly being stopped by business associates of his father, old family friends, and people whose names blurred into a single generic monolith of wealth. Claire stayed by his side, a polite smile fixed on her face, feeling like a ghost. The conversations around her were a dizzying mix of stock portfolios, summer plans in the Hamptons, and gossip about who was buying which yacht. It was a language she didn't speak. When someone did bother to ask her a question, it was always the same. "So, Claire, what is it that you do?" The emphasis was always on the do, as if her entire existence could be distilled into a job title. "I'm a painter," she would reply. "Oh, how lovely. A hobbyist," a woman with a face stretched taut from surgery asked. "I sell my work," Claire said quietly. "Mostly landscapes." "Landscapes? That's nice," the woman said, her eyes already scanning the crowd for someone more important to talk to. She felt Liam's frustration growing alongside her own humiliation. He tried to steer the conversation, to praise her talent, to show them who she really was. But it was like trying to stop a tide. Their minds were made up. The true ambush, however, was waiting by the champagne fountain. Madison Davenport, Liam's ex-girlfriend, was holding a flute of bubbly, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine advertisement. She was the daughter of a rival real estate mogul, a woman who, in Ariana's eyes, was the perfect match for her son. Madison and Liam had dated for years, a Society Pages approved coupling that had been expected to end in a merger both corporate and personal. Claire's arrival had shattered that expectation, and Madison had never forgiven her for it. Well, well, if it isn't the happy couple. Madison purred her eyes, locking onto Claire's stomach. Or should I say the growing family, my Claire. You certainly didn't waste any time, did you? Liam stepped forward, his body language instantly protective. Madison, that's enough. Oh, Liam, don't be so sensitive, Madison said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Everyone's thinking it. I'm just the only one with the courage to say it. It's a classic move, really. I should be taking notes. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. The implication was grotesquely clear. She was a gold digger who had gotten pregnant to lock Liam down. It was the narrative Ariana had been spinning from the start, and Madison was its gleeful town crier. My wife's pregnancy is a joy, not a strategy, Liam said, his voice low and cold. Apologize to her. Madison let out a brittle laugh. Apologize for what? Stating the obvious. Darling, look at her. She shows up here in a dress from... Where is that from, anyway? A department store. She doesn't fit in. And she knows it. The baby is her only claim to the Vanderbilt name, and we all know it. Each word was a physical blow. Claire could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on them, the ambient chatter of the party dimming as people leaned in to watch the drama unfold. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She looked past Madison and saw Ariana standing a few feet away, watching the exchange with a look of cold satisfaction. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was an orchestrated attack. Ariana had positioned her queen to take out the pawn. Claire tugged on Liam's arm. Liam, let's just go. Please. No, he said, his anger now white-hot. Not until she apologizes. But it was too late. The damage was done. The poison had been administered, and Claire could feel it spreading through her veins, a cold, sickening burn of shame and helplessness. She was trapped on display, and the woman her husband once loved was leading the charge to destroy her. The confrontation with Madison left a stain on the afternoon, a dark cloud that even the brilliant Connecticut sun couldn't burn away. Liam, furious, had pulled Claire away from the fountain, his arm a rigid band around her waist. He wanted to leave immediately, but Claire, in a haze of humiliation and a strange, stubborn flicker of defiance, insisted they stay. To run would be to admit defeat, to prove them right. I'm not going to let them chase us out of your family's home, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I just need a minute. He led her to a more secluded part of the garden, a small stone bench tucked away behind a trellis of climbing roses. The noise of the party faded to a dull murmur. I am so sorry, Claire, he said, his face etched with anger and regret. I should never have pushed you to come. I'm an idiot. I keep thinking they'll see you for who you are, that they'll eventually come around. It's not your fault, she said, though a small part of her felt a pang of resentment. He couldn't truly understand, because he had never been on the outside. He had never had his worth measured and found wanting in a single sweeping glance. They're snobs and they're bullies, he continued, his voice tight. Madison is just bitter. And my mother, she's... He trailed off, unable to find the right word to condemn the woman who raised him. She's protecting her legacy. Claire finished for him, a wave of weary understanding washing over her. And in her eyes, I'm a threat to it. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the scent of roses thick in the air. The baby gave a soft kick, as if sensing her mother's distress. Claire placed a hand on her belly, a protective gesture. This was about more than just her now. It was about the world her child would be born into. Would they always be seen as less than by their own family, just as they were steeling themselves to rejoin the fray? Liam's father, Richard Vanderbilt, appeared. He was a bull of a man with a loud voice and a presence that filled any room. Unlike his wife, his judgments were not about breeding, but about business. He saw Liam's marriage to a no-name artist as a missed opportunity for a strategic alliance. Liam, there you are. I need to introduce you to John Hennessy. He's the zoning commissioner for the new waterfront project. His support is critical. Richard's eyes barely registered Claire's presence. He clapped his son on the shoulder, already steering him away. "Dad, just a minute," Liam protested, looking back at Claire with apologetic eyes. "It won't take a minute. This is important. Come on." "It's okay," Claire mouthed to Liam. "Go. I'll be fine." He hesitated, but the pull of family duty and billion-dollar deals was too strong. He gave her a final worried look and was swallowed back into the party. The moment Liam was gone, Claire felt a chill, as if the sun had gone behind a cloud. She was alone again, and the predators could sense it. She decided the safest place was on the fringes. She found a glass of iced tea and stood near the edge of the sprawling lawn, watching the guests mingle, feeling utterly invisible. But her invisibility was an illusion. She was being observed. Ariana and a small group of her closest friends, Madison included, had settled into a cluster of wrought iron chairs on the veranda. They were speaking in low tones, but every so often their laughter would rise, sharp and brittle, and their eyes would flick in her direction. Claire didn't need to hear the words to know she was the subject of their conversation. They were dissecting her like a science project, her simple dress, her lack of jewelry, her quiet demeanor. Each observation was surely another piece of evidence in their case against her. "See, she doesn't belong. She's a fraud." An older woman, Claire vaguely recognized as a Vanderbilt cousin, approached her, her face a mask of feigned sympathy. "Claire, dear, you must be feeling so overwhelmed by all this." The woman began, gesturing vaguely at the opulent scene. "I'm all right, thank you," Claire said politely. "It's just, we're all so surprised you understand," the woman continued, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Liam always dated such substantial girls from good families, like Madison. You know her father, Charles Davenport, just closed that massive deal in Dubai. A wonderful family." The message was clear. A family's worth was measured in financial transactions. "And your family, dear." The woman pressed her eyes, gleaming with morbid curiosity. "Liam is so tight-lipped about them. Are they? Well." The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Are they rich? Are they presentable? Are they worthy of us?" "They're very private people," Claire said, her standard, well-rehearsed line. "They live a quiet life." "Ah, quiet," the woman repeated, as if the word itself was a diagnosis of some unfortunate but manageable disease. "Well, that's sweet." She patted Claire's arm condescendingly, before drifting away, no doubt, to report her findings back to Ariana's tribunal. The slow poison of their words was working its way through her system. It wasn't just the overt cruelty of Madison's comments, but the 1,000 tiny cuts of condescension, the feigned sympathy that was really just prying the constant, suffocating judgment. They were chipping away at her confidence, making her doubt her own worth, making her feel like the imposter they believed her to be. She felt a desperate urge to call her father, to hear his calm, steady voice. He would know what to say. He would probably tell her to get in a cab and come home, that these people weren't worth a moment of her time. But she couldn't. Calling him would mean admitting defeat. It would mean she couldn't handle this on her own. She scanned the crowd for Liam, but he was still deep in conversation with his father and the commissioner, a pained expression on his face. He was trapped, too, in his own way. The final, most calculated blow came, as she knew it would, from Ariana herself. She had risen from her seat and was now making her way towards Claire, a serene smile on her face. Madison trailed behind her, like a loyal, venomous lady-in-waiting. "Claire, darling," Ariana began, her voice smooth as silk. "I hope you're not finding things too dull. It must all be a bit much for you." "I'm fine, Ariana," Claire said, forcing her chin up. "It's just—" Ariana continued, lowering her voice, but keeping it loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm concerned about the baby. Stress is so bad for a pregnancy. And you seem so fragile. Are you sure you're up for the demands of being a Vanderbilt? It requires a certain fortitude, a certain pedigree." The word pedigree landed like a slap. They were talking about her as if she were a show dog, a brood mare whose bloodline was being questioned. Madison chimed in, her voice dripping with malice. "What Ariana is trying to say, Claire, is that we're all worried the baby might be overwhelmed by the sheer shock of being born into a world it's not equipped to handle." Claire stared at them, speechless. The cruelty was so breathtaking, so absolute. They weren't just attacking her. They were attacking her unborn child. They were suggesting her baby was somehow tainted unworthy because of her. A hot, dizzying wave of anger and despair washed over her. The polite smile she had been wearing all day finally shattered. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her emotions crumbled. Her vision blurred with tears. She had to get away. She had to escape before she completely fell apart in front of them all. This wasn't a party anymore. It was a public execution. The world seemed to narrow to a pinpoint of sound and light. The laughing faces of Ariana and Madison, the murmuring of the guests who had overheard the clinking of glasses, it all swirled into a nauseating cacophony. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The insult against her child was a line she never imagined they would cross. It was a cruelty so profound it stole the air from her lungs. "Excuse me." She managed to choke out her voice, a fractured whisper. She turned and fled. She didn't run, but she walked as fast as her swollen ankles would carry her, away from the veranda, past the pristine flower beds, towards the far edge of the vast lawn. She didn't look back to see Liam, who was finally pushing his way through the crowd, his face a mask of thunder. She just needed space. She needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with their contempt. She finally stopped near an ancient oak tree at the boundary of the manicured lawn, its shade offering a sliver of solace. The party was a distant tableau of pastel colors and muted sound. Here she was hidden, but the humiliation was a physical cloak, heavy and suffocating. Tears she had been holding back for hours finally streamed down her face. They were hot tears of anger, of shame, of profound loneliness. She had tried so hard. She had been polite. She had been quiet. She had endured their condescension with a forced smile. But it was never going to be enough. To them, she would always be the girl from nowhere, the stain on their perfect family portrait. The baby fluttered inside her, a frantic little dance that mirrored her own agitated heartbeat. Claire wrapped her arms around her belly, a primal protective instinct kicking in. It was one thing to endure their scorn herself, but to have them project it onto her innocent unborn child was unbearable. They had questioned her pedigree. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. Her family's pedigree could buy and sell the Vanderbilts 100 times over without noticing the transaction. Her father wasn't just in logistics. Alistair Vance didn't just run a company. He commanded a global empire. Vance Global was a behemoth in private aviation logistics and cutting-edge tech, a silent titan whose influence extended into governments and markets worldwide. He was a man who prized privacy so fiercely that he employed teams of people to keep his name out of the papers, a man whose personal wealth was a matter of myth and speculation, because no one could accurately calculate it. And his only child, his heir, was currently crying behind a tree at a garden party, being mocked by a pack of provincial real estate snobs. A new emotion burned through the shame rage. A cold, clear rage she hadn't felt in years. They wanted to talk about fortitude, about power. They had no idea what power was. They flaunted their new money like a gaudy costume, while her family wore their influence like a second skin, unseen, unspoken, but absolute. She had wanted to do this on her own. She had wanted her marriage to be a space untouched by the complexities of her background. But they had pushed her. They had cornered her, hurt her, and threatened the sanctity of her child's future. They had left her no choice. Her hand trembled as she pulled her phone from her small purse. Her thumb hovered over the single contact, saved under Dad. It was a direct satellite line, always on, always answered. She had only used it a handful of times in her life for true emergencies. In a way, this felt like one. It was an emergency of the spirit. She pressed the call button. It was answered before the first ring finished. No greeting, just the familiar, calm voice that had been her anchor her entire life. "Claire, what's wrong?" He could hear the distress in her silence. "Daddy." Her voice broke the single word conveying all her pain. "I'm sorry to bother you. You are never a bother. Talk to me. Where are you?" I'm at Liam's parents' house, in Connecticut." She could hear the faint sound of a jet engine in the background on his end. He was probably in the air halfway across the world. What have they done? His voice was still calm, but it was a dangerous calm now. The calm of a storm gathering force far out at sea. She couldn't bring herself to repeat the vile words. "They're just awful. They said things about the baby." She choked on a sob. I want to go home. Can you come get me? Please." It was a plea she hadn't made since she was a child, sick at a sleepover. The request felt juvenile, weak, but she didn't care anymore. She had reached her limit. There was a brief pause on the line. She heard him speak to someone else, his voice muted but decisive. "Divert to Westchester County Airport, now, and have the chopper on standby. Tell them 5 minutes after we land. The destination is a private residence in Greenwich. I'm sending you the coordinates." He came back on the line to her. The jet engine sound was gone. He must have been in a soundproofed office on his plane. His voice was warm and solid as stone. "I was over Ohio. I'm on my way. I will be there in less than an hour. Find a safe place to wait for me. I will come to you directly." "Directly?" Claire asked, confused. "But the traffic from the airport." "There won't be any traffic," he said, simply. The statement was absolute, unquestionable. "Just stay put, sweetheart. I'm coming." The line went dead. Claire slid down to the base of the oak tree, her back against the rough bark. An hour. He would be here in an hour. Relief warred with a new terrifying anxiety. She had just lit a match. She had no idea how big the fire would be. Back on the lawn, the party continued oblivious. Liam had finally cornered his mother, his voice a low, furious growl. Ariana looked irritated, dismissive. Madison was smirking. They thought they had won. They thought the little mouse had scurried back to her hole, defeated. They had no idea that a dragon was coming. And he was coming for his daughter. The first 45 minutes after the phone call were the longest of Claire's life. She remained by the oak tree, a solitary figure, watching the party from a distance. She saw Liam break away from his mother and start searching for her, his face a storm of anxiety. He called her phone, but she silenced it, letting it go to voicemail. She couldn't face him yet. She couldn't explain what she had just set in motion. Her own actions felt unreal, like something from a dream. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the impossibly perfect lawn. The party had reached its peak. The laughter was louder, the conversations looser. Ariana Vanderbilt was gliding through the crowd, a triumphant smile on her face. Her problem, the unsuitable daughter-in-law, had been successfully vanquished, sent scurrying to the sidelines. Her world was back in order. And then came the sound. It started as a subtle vibration, a low hum that was more felt than heard. A few guests paused, tilting their heads. It grew, steadily resolving into a deep, rhythmic chopping. A whump, whump, whump that was utterly alien to the genteel atmosphere of the garden party. "Is that a helicopter?" someone asked, looking up at the clear blue sky. Richard Vanderbilt grumbled to a guest beside him. "Probably the traffic report chopper from the city. They have no respect for private airspace." But this was no news helicopter. The sound intensified, growing from a nuisance to a deafening roar that vibrated in everyone's chest. The rhythmic thumping was now a physical force, rattling the champagne glasses on the serving tables. Conversations sputtered and died as every head turned towards the sky. Liam finally spotted Claire by the tree and started walking towards her, his face filled with relief and confusion. "Claire, what's going on? Are you okay?" But Claire's eyes were fixed on the sky above the tree line. A monstrous shape appeared. It was a Sikorsky S-92, a colossal machine typically used for offshore oil rig transport or heads of state. Sleek, impossibly black, it blotted out the sun as it descended. This was not an aircraft. It was a statement of overwhelming power. Panic and confusion rippled through the party. Guests backed away from the lawn, shielding their eyes. The downdraft from the massive rotors hit the ground like a hurricane. Napkins flew into the air, a tray of canapés was sent scattering, and women shrieked as their carefully styled hair was whipped into a frenzy. Ariana's prize-winning peonies were flattened against the earth. The helicopter didn't circle or wait for permission. It descended with unnerving precision, its landing gear extending as it aimed for the very center of the Vanderbilt's pristine, multi-million-dollar lawn. The one Richard Vanderbilt had just resodded at a cost Claire couldn't even fathom. "What in God's name is happening?" Richard bellowed, his face turning a shade of purple. "Is it the police? A medical emergency?" Ariana stood frozen on the veranda, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Her perfect party, her perfectly ordered world, was literally being blown apart. The massive helicopter touched down with a final ground-shaking thud, its engines beginning to wind down, but the rotors still spinning with formidable speed. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. No one landed a private helicopter on a residential lawn in this part of Greenwich, without a dozen permits and a flight plan filed weeks in advance. To do so was an act of supreme, untouchable arrogance. A door on the side of the aircraft slid open. For a moment, nothing happened. The entire party, over 100 of the East Coast's most influential people, stood in stunned, silent witness. Liam had reached Claire's side, grabbing her arm. "Claire, what is this?" "Do you know what's happening?" Claire couldn't speak. She just pointed. A figure emerged from the dark interior of the helicopter and stepped onto the lawn. He was a man in his late 60s, dressed not in a flashy suit, but in simple, tailored grey trousers and a dark cashmere sweater. He was tall and lean, with a full head of silver hair and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He moved with an unhurried, deliberate grace, completely unbothered by the wind from the slowing rotors or the 100 pairs of eyes fixed upon him. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the mansion. His gaze scanned the edge of the lawn until it found the one person he was looking for. His eyes met Claire's. A murmur went through the crowd as a few people, mostly titans of finance and industry, recognized the man. It started as a whisper, then grew into a wave of shocked disbelief. "Is that? It can't be." John Hennessy, the zoning commissioner, Richard Vanderbilt, had been so eager to impress, went pale. "My God," he breathed. "That's Alistair Vance." The name dropped into the party like a bomb. Alistair Vance, the reclusive billionaire, the phantom who moved markets with a single phone call. A man so powerful and so private that seeing him in person was like spotting a unicorn. And he had just landed his personal war machine on the Vanderbilt's front lawn. Ignoring everyone, Alistair Vance walked directly towards Claire. He moved with the quiet authority of a man who had never in his adult life had someone tell him no. The crowd parted before him as if by magic. He stopped in front of his daughter, his stern face softening with a deep paternal love. He reached out and gently brushed a tear track from her cheek. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice calm and low, yet it seemed to carry across the entire silent lawn. Claire simply nodded, fresh tears welling in her eyes, this time of relief. Alistair then turned his gaze. It swept past a dumbfounded Liam, past the gawking guests, and settled on Ariana and Richard Vanderbilt, who were standing petrified on their veranda. His eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were cold, analytical, and utterly dismissive. It was the look a god might give an insect. The message was terrifyingly clear. They had not just insulted some poor, unconnected girl. They had harmed the most precious thing in the world to one of the most powerful men on the planet. And he had come to collect her. The silence on the lawn was absolute, broken only by the slowing whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of the helicopter's rotors. Every guest was frozen, a tableau of shock and dawning comprehension. The social hierarchy of the entire eastern seaboard had just been redrawn in the time it took for a man to step out of a helicopter. The Vanderbilts, who had positioned themselves at the top of this local pyramid, had just been revealed to be standing in the foothills of a mountain they didn't even know existed. Liam stared, his mind struggling to connect the dots. Claire, his quiet, unassuming wife, who loved farmers' markets and old bookstores. Alistair Vance, the legendary, almost mythical figure he'd read about in the Wall Street Journal. And the two of them were standing together, a father and a daughter. The worn silver locket Claire always wore. It suddenly made sense. It wasn't just a trinket. It was a link to a world he couldn't imagine. Alistair Vance kept one hand gently on Claire's shoulder. He then turned his full attention to Liam. He didn't look angry, but his gaze was intensely appraising, searching. "You're the husband," Alistair stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Sir," Liam managed his voice, hoarse. "I'm Liam Vanderbilt. I know who you are." Alistair said, his tone flat. "My daughter called me distraught. She asked me to come and get her. Explain to me why my pregnant daughter felt the need to be airlifted out of your family's home as if it were a war zone." Liam flinched. The question was a spear, and it hit its mark. He had failed to protect her. He had brought her into this nest of vipers and allowed her to be attacked. Shame, hot and profound, washed over him. My mother and some of the guests, they were unkind to her." Liam stammered, feeling the inadequacy of the words. Unkind was a pathetic understatement for the calculated cruelty she had endured. "I tried to stop it. I didn't realize how bad it was. It's my fault. I am so sorry." Alistair held his gaze for a long moment, and Liam felt as though his entire life, his character, his very soul was being weighed and measured. Finally, Alistair gave a curt nod, a flicker of something that might have been approval in his eyes. He appreciated the honesty, the immediate acceptance of blame. His gaze then shifted, moving past Liam to the figures on the veranda. He took a deliberate step forward, and it felt like the entire garden held its breath. He addressed Ariana directly, his voice devoid of any emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "Mrs. Vanderbilt." Ariana, who prided herself on her composure, looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Her face was ashen, her perfect smile gone, replaced by a slack-jawed terror. "Mr. Vance?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I had no idea. We had no idea." "That is precisely the problem," Alistair said, his voice as cold and sharp as breaking ice. "You judge what you do not understand. You assign value to people based on the most superficial and insulting of metrics. You made my daughter a woman of more substance and character than anyone here feel worthless. You made her cry." He let that simple accusation hang in the air, its weight heavier than any financial threat. "And then," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "you presumed to speak of her pedigree. You questioned the worth of my grandchild." He took another step closer. Richard Vanderbilt puffed out his chest, a reflexive, foolish attempt to stand his ground, but Alistair's presence seemed to suck the very air out of him. "Let me be clear," Alistair said, his eyes locking onto Ariana's. "My family's pedigree is not a topic for garden party gossip. You have mistaken a quiet nature for weakness. You have mistaken humility for a lack of worth. These are errors in judgment I would not tolerate in one of my junior executives, let alone from people who my daughter was supposed to call family." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "The damage to your lawn is unfortunate," he said, gesturing with a flick of his wrist. "My office will send a check. I suggest you find a very, very good landscaper." The dismissal was absolute. He had reduced their entire world, their mansion, their social standing, their pride to a patch of damaged grass that could be fixed with a check. He was telling them in no uncertain terms that they were an inconvenience he would pay to have removed. He turned to Madison Davenport, whose smug expression had dissolved into one of abject horror. Her father's company had several pending contracts that were peripherally connected to Vance Global's shipping network. Her face was a mask of pure panic as she realized the catastrophic implications of her petty cruelty. Alistair didn't even speak to her. He simply gave her a look of such profound contempt that she physically recoiled. He didn't need to say a word. Her fate in this world was sealed. Finally, he turned back to Claire and Liam. "We're leaving," he said gently. "Liam, you are my daughter's husband and the father of my grandchild. You are welcome to come with us." It was a test. He was offering Liam a choice: stay here in the wreckage of his family's social standing, or come with them into a world he didn't understand. Liam didn't hesitate. He looked at Claire, at her tear-stained face, at the protective way her father stood beside her. And the choice was the easiest one he had ever made. His family was here. This woman and the child she carried. "Of course," Liam said, his voice firm and clear. He took Claire's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Wherever Claire goes, I go." Alistair Vance nodded once, satisfied. He led them across the lawn towards the waiting helicopter. As they walked, the assembled guests, the powerful, the wealthy, the arrogant, averted their eyes. They looked down at their shoes, at their drinks, anywhere but at the procession. They were ashamed. They were terrified. They had backed the wrong horse in a race they didn't even know they were running. As Claire was helped up into the luxurious cabin of the helicopter, she took one last look back at the party. Ariana was leaning on her husband for support, her face crumpled in ruin. Madison was standing alone, ostracized. The perfect garden party was over. The helicopter door slid shut, sealing them in a world of quiet leather and polished wood. As the engines spooled up and the massive aircraft lifted off the ground, leaving the Vanderbilt mansion, shrinking below, Claire leaned her head on Liam's shoulder. She wasn't just leaving a party. She was leaving behind a life of fear and secrecy and flying towards a future where she would never again have to hide who she was. The reckoning was over, and a new beginning was just starting. The inside of the helicopter was another world. The roar of the rotors was muted to a distant humming pulse, insulated by layers of soundproofing. The cabin was more like the study of a 5-star hotel, with plush cream leather seats, polished mahogany accents, and a small, fully stocked bar. Claire, Liam, and Alistair sat in silence for the first few minutes of the flight, the surreal events of the past hour settling over them. Below, the sprawling estates of Greenwich gave way to the shimmering waters of the Long Island Sound as the helicopter banked west, heading towards the city. Liam was the first to speak, his voice quiet and heavy with emotion. He turned to Claire, his eyes filled with a love so deep it ached, but also with a profound sorrow. "I can't believe I never knew," he said. "Claire, why didn't you tell me?" Claire twisted her wedding ring around her finger. "I was afraid," she whispered, looking from her husband to her father. "I fell in love with you, Liam, with the man who saw me in that tiny art gallery, who didn't care what my last name was, or how much money was attached to it. I fell in love with our life, the one we built, that had nothing to do with all of this." She gestured around the opulent cabin. "I've seen what this kind of wealth does." She continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've seen it make people suspicious, greedy, and unkind. I didn't want it to touch us. I didn't want you to look at me differently. I was so terrified of becoming Alistair Vance's daughter instead of just being Claire, your wife." Liam reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "Oh, darling. Nothing could ever change the way I look at you. Nothing. I fell in love with you, Claire. Not a name, not a bank account. You. Your kindness, your talent, your beautiful heart. That's all that has ever mattered to me." He leaned in and kissed her, a tender, reaffirming gesture that spoke more than words. "But I understand now. I understand the pressure you must have been under. And I'm so sorry I added to it by bringing you into their world." Alistair Vance, who had been watching the exchange with a quiet intensity, finally spoke. His voice was softer now, the hard edge of command gone, replaced by the gentle tone of a father. "He's a good man, Claire," he said, looking at Liam. "You chose well." He then turned to his son-in-law. "Liam, I apologize for the dramatic nature of my arrival. But when my daughter calls me in distress, I do not stand on ceremony." "Sir, you have nothing to apologize for," Liam said earnestly. "You did what any father would do. You protected your daughter. I should have done a better job of that myself." "You stood up to your family for her," Alistair countered. "I have my people look into anyone who gets close to Claire. The reports on you were surprising. An architect from a wealthy family who chose to focus on community projects instead of skyscrapers. A man who by all accounts was genuinely in love with a woman he believed to be of modest means. You passed a test you didn't even know you were taking." The revelation stunned Liam. He had been vetted, investigated. It should have felt invasive, but in that moment it just felt like further proof of the fierce, protective love Alistair had for his daughter. "Where are we going?" Claire asked, looking out the window, as the skyline of Manhattan appeared a glittering jewel against the twilight. "To your home," Alistair replied. "The city apartment is yours, a wedding gift I purchased for you under a trust. I figured you'd need a sanctuary from them." Claire looked at Liam, her eyes wide. Their cozy apartment, their safe haven, had been a gift from her father all along. It was another layer of his unseen protective influence. As the helicopter began its descent towards a private helipad in the city, Claire felt the last of the day's tension melt away. The humiliation, the fear, the anger. It was all fading, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The secret she had carried for so long was finally out, and her world hadn't ended. In fact, her marriage felt stronger than ever. Liam knew everything, and he still looked at her with the same love and adoration. The aftermath of their departure would be catastrophic for the Vanderbilts. Socially, they were ruined. To have Alistair Vance himself publicly and dramatically rebuke them was a death sentence in their circle. Financially, the fallout would be slow but certain. Doors would quietly close. Deals would mysteriously fall through. Richard Vanderbilt's aggressive business practices had made him many enemies, and now his most powerful shield, his reputation, was gone. He was vulnerable, and the sharks would circle. But none of that was Claire's concern anymore. As they stepped out of the helicopter into the cool city air, Liam wrapped his arm firmly around her. Alistair placed a hand on his grandchild's future home, Claire's belly. "You two need to decide what comes next," Alistair said. "The world knows who you are now, Claire. Things will be different, but you will face it together, and you will never have to endure a day like this again. That I promise." Looking at her husband's loving face and her father's steadfast presence, Claire knew he was right. She was no longer just Claire, the quiet painter. She was Claire Vance Vanderbilt, a woman loved by two strong men, a woman about to become a mother. She had found her voice not in shouting or fighting, but in the quiet, desperate call for help that had summoned thunder from the sky. Her old life was over, but standing there between her husband and her father, with her baby safe within her, she felt an overwhelming sense of hope. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of her real story, a story she would now write on her own terms. Claire's story is a powerful reminder that true worth is never about the price tag on your dress or the name on your invitation. It's about the quiet strength you carry inside the love you nurture and the courage to stand up for yourself, even when your voice shakes. The world is full of people like the Vanderbilts who judge based on superficial standards, and people like Madison, who build themselves up by tearing others down. But as Claire learned, humility is not weakness, and a quiet life does not mean a powerless one. The most powerful people are often the ones who don't need to announce it. What would you have done in Claire's place? Would you have endured the insults in silence, or would you have made that call? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of justice, love, and the ultimate family power play moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Every like helps us share more stories like this. Don't forget to share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from our channel. Thank you for listening.